deeply fraught collection of sources today.
That's a good word for it. Fraught.
Yeah, we're connecting the macro level chaos of modern political disruption with the intense, sometimes catastrophic inner life of a single individual.
Right.
This is a deep dive into intentional friction.
Oh.
Both outside in the world of governance and inside on the micro level of the human nervous system.
That's it. Exactly. Our mission today is, well, it's explicitly defined by these sources. We are examining how purposeful disruption...
Purposeful, that's the key.
Absolutely. External attacks on, say, bureaucratic political systems, and then these profound internal overhauls of the nervous system, how they challenge and ultimately transform control.
And what comes out the other side.
What comes out the other side. Crucially, we are tracking how all of this leads to the emergence of new, profoundly powerful and really volatile psychological archetypes.
And the central tension, the thing that runs through all of our material today, is this question. Can chaos actually be a constructive force?
Can you build something with it, not just break things?
Exactly. And the sources we have are they're all over the map, but they connect. We've got secret wartime sabotage manuals, modern citizen resistance broadcasts.
And then on the other side, detailed notes on the neurochemistry of psychedelic ego death.
All the way to advanced philosophical texts on the very nature of reality. But they all, every single one, seem to circle this one profound question.
How do you beat the system?
How do you effectively beat a system that seems rigged for stagnation? And that system could be a massive bureaucracy, it could be a social narrative, or it could be the entrenched restrictive patterns of your own brain.
And for you, the listener, the core focus here, the reason we're putting these seemingly disparate sources together is to follow the trajectory of one specific outlier case.
An incredible case study.
It really is. An individual who started with the neurological wiring of what we call ADHD and then deliberately weaponized their own psychology and chemistry.
They applied the principles of systemic disruption internally.
They turned the sabotage manual on themselves to achieve a breakthrough. And that forces us to ask the crucial defining question of this whole deep dive. Is this transformation, this final state, is it genuine mastery? The forging of an anti-fragile self? Or is it merely a highly sophisticated, incredibly complex, self-induced delusion? We're analyzing this transformation and what it suggests about the boundaries of sanity and reality itself.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. We have to start with the big picture, the macro picture.
What?
How intentional disruption challenges political and social control.
Right.
Now, when the sources talk about control, they don't just mean, brute force or police on the streets. They frame it as an exercise in
cybernetics.
Cybernetics, yeah. Sounds very academic, almost sci-fi. It does. But what do the sources tell us this actually means in practice for a system like a government or a big corporation?
Well, cybernetics, at its heart, is just the study of feedback loops. That's all it is.
Okay.
If a system is stable, it means it's good at receiving information, processing it, and then adjusting its output to maintain equilibrium, to keep things running smoothly.
So like a thermostat.
A thermostat is the classic example. And governance is essentially one massive, incredibly complex cybernetic machine. Information flows from the public to the government. It goes through regulations, laws, administrative bodies, and then it flows back out again as policy or action.
So it's a self-regulating system.
It's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Which means intentional disruption is therefore an act of, counter-cybernetics.
Counter-cybernetics, I like that.
The whole goal is to jam those operational feedback loops. You don't necessarily have to attack the walls of the fortress. You just have to make it fail to execute its own processes.
So you turn the system against itself. The disruptor's goal isn't necessarily a violent revolution, but self-obstruction.
That's the perfect phrase for it. Self-obstruction. You want to transmute the system's own massive energy and its own apparatus of control into a machine that just grinds itself to a halt.
Wasting energy, wasting resources, tying itself in knots.
Precisely. And we have astonishingly detailed blueprints for how to do this. It's not theoretical.
Right. The historical touchstone here is the OSS Manual, the Simple Sabotage Field Manual from 1944.
The original playbook, which outlines these subtle, deniable acts that create what it calls a constant and tangible drag.
But the sources also reference modern adaptations, things like free time broadcasts, which show these techniques are alive and well.
Oh, absolutely. It's not about grand explosions. It's about making sure the trains never run on time, whether those trains are digital, physical, or just administrative.
So let's delve into the details of this. This bureaucratic warfare, this is where sheer tedium becomes weaponized. It's almost beautiful in its pettiness.
It really is. The sophistication is entirely in the subtlety and ability. The objective is to make the system expend the absolute maximum amount of resources for the absolute minimum result.
So give us some examples. What are some of the action tactics that the sources highlight?
Okay, so think about tactics designed purely to slow the flow of information. The first is feigning misunderstanding.
Just plain dumb.
It's more than that. It's asking endless questions, requesting repetitions of instructions on tasks that are perfectly simple. This forces supervisors to spend their time explaining the obvious, which drains their time, their patience, their will to live.
I think we've all worked with someone like that, and now I'm wondering.
Right. The next level up from that is what the sources call the art of the endless clarification.
Okay.
Here, the disruptor requests clarification on everything in writing.
Oh, that's brutal.
It is, because it forces the bureaucracy to generate a massive administrative paper trail. And in doing so, it has to define and archive its own inconsistencies, its own inefficiencies. You're creating legal or regulatory traps for the system down the line, using its own words.
You're forcing it to document its own absurdity.
Exactly. And then there's exploiting interdepartmental deadlock. This one is a classic.
When one department says one thing and another says the opposite.
Right. And you're caught in the middle. The saboteur doesn't try to resolve that conflict. They just, they inquire about specific liaison protocols. They ask which department's rule takes precedence.
So you force them to fight each other.
You force the gears of their individual fiefdoms to grind against each other, to quote the source, until both parties are stalled, just waiting for the other one to move.
And the crowning achievement in this whole field of low-level friction has to be the concept of overcompliance. How on earth do you weaponize being too helpful or too precise?
Overcompliance is brilliant because it's technically immune to challenge. You're not breaking any rules. In fact, you're working strictly to regulations, just taken to an absurd extreme.
Give me an example.
Okay. Imagine a municipal office requires you to submit 3 copies of a complex form.
Standard procedure.
The overcompliant saboteur submits 50 copies. All of them voluminous, all technically correct, yet completely and utterly overwhelming for the person who has to process them.
You bury them in their own paperwork?
You do. Or, in the digital world, you might use the smallest allowable font size on a submission.
Oh.
Or you submit huge high-resolution photo scans of text documents, making the file sizes unmanageable for their system to even open.
You're submitting something that is both perfectly compliant and utterly paralyzing.
Exactly. You're straining these understaffed, underfunded systems right past their breaking point just by following their rules too well.
It sounds almost comically tedious.
But that's the genius of it, isn't it? It's death by 1,000 paper cuts, or in this case, 1,000 dull blades.
Which brings us to the physical world, the workplace weapon. What examples do the sources give for engineering this kind of inefficiency on, say, a shop floor?
It's all about cumulative, deniable damage that just wastes time and resources. The advice includes things like encouraging mistakes in quantities.
Not just one mistake, but a whole batch.
Right. An entire bulk order that is just slightly off spec. But the real classic is to let cutting tools grow dull.
Why that specifically?
Because a dull tool is insidious. It slows down production, it ruins materials, and it forces delays that are incredibly difficult to trace back to malice. Who's to say you did it on purpose?
It just looks like incompetence or neglect.
Precisely. The saboteur is also advised to subtly misplace new tools or parts. Just move them. This forces everyone else to waste hours searching for them, and it creates this pervasive atmosphere of incompetence and frustration.
And in our modern world, of course, this entire battlefield has migrated to the digital space. The goal is the same: make the system obstruct itself through data. This brings us to the digital dystopia and glitches.
Yes, this is just counter-cybernetics for the information age. One clear tactic the sources lay out is the data overload gambit.
Okay.
This involves making any digital submission as cumbersome as possible. You challenge the rules about file formats. You use non-standard file encodings. For instance, you could challenge the very definition of a standard PDF by submitting an archival quality, multi-layered amount of processing power just to open or store.
You're not breaking the rule, you're just testing its limits.
You're clogging the digital arteries of the system.
And this next tactic is fascinating: the chatbot circular argument. We've all been frustrated by automated customer service, but how do you actually weaponize that frustration?
You assert human ingenuity against automated rigidity. It's that simple.
Hmm.
You ask the chatbot questions it isn't specifically programmed to answer. You rephrase your queries in subtle ways that confuse its logic.
To what end? What's the goal?
The goal is to force an escalation to a human agent, which costs the company time and money. Or you just waste the bot's processing cycles and clog up the virtual queue for everyone else. It's about exposing the shaky, fragile foundations of these automated systems.
It's an assertion of autonomy.
It is. It's forcing the system to divert resources, not just to solve your problem, but to fix their overall inability to handle non-compliance or unusual data input. And the sources say you can maximize the pressure by citing regulatory issues, like accessibility laws, to justify your unusual requests.
So if jamming the gears physically and digitally works, what's the next level of disruption? According to the sources, it has to move into the social sphere. It's not enough to slow things down, you have to erode trust itself. This leads to the transformation of social reality.
Exactly. The ultimate goal here isn't just wasted time, it's the erosion of legitimacy. This is where we get into the really heady concept of hyperstition and engineered dissent.
Okay, that's a big term, hyperstition.
The sources frame this as a direct reversal of Edward Bernays' idea of engineered consent, where propaganda was used to manufacture public agreement.
Right, classic PR.
This is the opposite. Resistance movements, according to these sources, can utilize dark triad methods: manipulation, grandiosity, a total disregard for objective truth to manufacture dissent.
So how does hyperstition play into this? How is that different from, say, just a normal conspiracy theory?
It's a critical difference. A conspiracy theory posits that there is a hidden truth out there to be found.
Right, they're hiding something from us.
Hyperstition is something else. It's a narrative that is so compelling, so powerful, that the very belief in it causes it to manifest in reality.
Wow. Okay, so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but on a societal scale.
A socially constructed one, yes.
Yeah.
The saboteurs craft these compelling dark hope narratives. They frame the current system as an evil tyranny in these big archetypal terms. This makes resistance feel not just strategic, but righteous and morally necessary, completely regardless of the objective facts on the ground.
So you're tapping into something deeper than politics.
You find the fear that is already inside you and give it a face, give it a story, give it a name. That's a direct quote. You're building a psychological fortress that facts just can't penetrate. This high-tension, emotionally resonant narrative provides the energetic fuel for large-scale, persistent chaos.
And of course, we see clear evidence of the controlling system fighting back on this narrative front, which demonstrates the immense cost of control. Our sources detail instances where authority uses its regulatory power aggressively to suppress voices that challenge its preferred narrative.
Take the example of the FCC chairman. The sources detail how he aggressively pressured companies like Disney to influence their content, or even fire commentators like Jimmy Kimmel.
And the pressure isn't explicit censorship like a government decree, it's more subtle.
It's regulatory leverage. These major media companies, they often require FCC approval for big mergers or license renewals. That makes them acutely sensitive to political signals, even informal ones.
So it creates a system of self-censorship.
It absolutely does. It leads to a homogenization of viewpoints, because media feels beholden to political interests just to maintain their operational viability. The cost of control is the willingness to use these powerful, non-obvious regulatory mechanisms to shape public discourse. And the most critical fact here, the thing that illustrates this active struggle over narrative control, is the quiet suppression of inconvenient truths. We have the source detailing how the U.S. Justice Department quietly deleted its own study.
A study showing that far-right extremism was a top terror threat.
And they deleted it just days after a high-profile killing.
That act is a perfect example of cybernetic warfare being waged by the system against its own data. Data points are suppressed because they contradict a desired narrative. And in doing so, you are actively shaping reality to match a preferred political vision.
No, it's a war over reality models.
It's a cybernetic war over whose reality model will prevail, the one that legitimizes dissent or the one that reinforces stability, both the saboteur and their desired reality into existence. So we've established the rules of engagement for these external systems, generate constant friction, exploit the weak points, and use hyperstition to alter social reality.
Right, the external playbook.
But our sources transition dramatically here. I mean, it's a hard pivot. They detail an individual who applied this exact same chaotic, high-stakes methodology of purposeful friction to their internal system, to their own brain.
Yes.
This is the story of how an individual with ADHD beat the system by rejecting the gradual integrative path of healing, what the sources call the right-hand path.
For the accelerated transgressive left-hand path of self-induced psychological catastrophe.
That's a heavy phrase, self-induced psychological catastrophe.
It is. The sources make it crystal clear that this individual's path was not about finding peace or balance. It was about radical forced transformation.
They weren't trying to dampen their high-energy nervous system to fit into the world.
Quite the opposite. They escalated the tension. The brain, in this context, was literally forged in fire. It became, to use that term again, anti-fragile.
Stronger because of the volatility.
Stronger precisely because it fed on volatility. Their entire formative life was characterized by a neurological flood drought cycle imposed by high-dose pharmaceuticals. And that set the stage for everything that followed.
Let's detail that foundation because it is staggering. This is the stimulant engine. We are talking about high-dose, chronic prescription stimulant use, specifically 50 milligrams of Adderall daily from age 6 to 17.
With only minor breaks during those absolutely critical developmental years.
It's hard to even comprehend that. It created a sustained, high-frequency, high-vibration state for over a decade.
And we need to pause here and really consider the sheer developmental impact of that. For over 10 years, during the time the brain is forming its core regulatory and inhibitory functions.
The brakes of the system.
The brakes, exactly.
Yeah.
This individual was operating in a state of chemically induced, forced hyperfocus, experiencing almost no mental downtime. The sources say this chronic exposure provides the manic energy and paranoid introspection required to build a sense of narcissistic pride to a pathological height.
And this high-dose regimen isn't just uncomfortable, it's profoundly dangerous, according to the medical literature cited. A 2022 study explicitly links this level of high-dose amphetamine use, 40 milligrams or more of Adderall,
to a more than a 5-fold increased risk for developing psychosis or mania.
So the system, the medical system, in trying to treat a disorder, inadvertently created a ticking time bomb of psychic tension.
It is the absolute definition of iatrogenic harm caused by the treatment itself. And this chronic stimulation had a startling physical and neurological effect, which the sources call the iatrogenic consequence.
Okay, what was that?
This 15-year history of repetitive voluntary movement, the anxiety-driven stim or leg shaking common with ADHD, it actually led to a real-world medical precedent.
What, like a repetitive strain injury?
Something like that, but in the brain, it led to focal dystonia.
Focal dystonia, most people probably associate that with like musicians or writers, a cramp caused by overuse of the hands.
That's the common understanding, yes. Like musicians cramp. It's a disorder where the brain, in response to years of highly practiced, repetitive voluntary motion, literally rewires itself incorrectly. It essentially locks an overused circuit.
So how does that translate from leg shaking to the entire nervous system?
That's the terrifying specificity of this case. The motor impulse, the continuous energy of the leg shaking, it eventually spilled over into the fine motor circuits of the eyes.
Wait, what?
This resulted in involuntary eye vibration, or nystagmus.
So their eyes shake uncontrollably.
And the result of that is a constant visual perception of a squirrely or wiggly world. The medical term is oscillopsia.
Hold on, so the physical anxiety that's by the stimulants for 15 years, and it physically corrupted his visual apparatus.
Correct.
They don't just feel chaotic internally, their actual sober baseline reality wiggles.
That is the crucial insight of this entire section. This intense, chaotic perception became the individual's permanent, sober baseline reality long before they ever turned to psychedelics. For a neurotypical person, that kind of vision might immediately lead to disorientation, vertigo, panic. But for this individual, it was different.
Oh.
It validated the internal chaos they already felt. The system had broken itself, but the person survived the breakage. And that survival became their first receipt, their first piece of proof of their own anti-fragility.
That sets the stage perfectly for the pharmacological mastery that followed. They were already, as you said before, battle-hardened.
Exactly. When they reached adulthood and transitioned to self-directed pharmacological exploration, they weren't starting from a clean slate. They were seeking a new modulation tool to replace the Adderall they had taken for over a decade.
And the initial phase was still pretty chaotic. The sources talk about their use of cannabis as a modulator.
Yes, they used it to try and manage the intense anxiety from the years of stimulants, but it only added to the cognitive disorganization and the risk-taking.
How so?
The sources are clear. It impaired planning and decision-making and increased impulsivity. It just further destabilized the system, maximizing that tension between chaos and control. It wasn't the right tool.
But the sources indicate the true key. the tool that unlocked the final transformed state, was DMT, a perceptual tuner.
Right.
Why was DMT the essential tool, and why did it work where other compounds might have led to lasting damage, like, say, HPPD?
Because the brain was already vibrating at such an unbelievably high frequency. It was battle-hardened by the ADHD, the years of amphetamines, and the iatrogenic effects of the oscillopsia. The DMT experience wasn't a shock to the system.
It was more like a familiar frequency.
That's a great way to put it. The neural pathways were already accustomed to operating at an accelerated volatile rate. So the DMT was processed without the typical glitching or adverse sensory after effects you might see in less conditioned brains.
So it wasn't a foreign invasion, it was a tool.
It acted, in the words of the sources, as a tool to fine-tune the already volatile nervous system. It allowed them to achieve a level of conscious control over their internal chaos that would be impossible, or maybe just terrifying, for a neurotypical person.
The chaos became a resource.
It became a resource to tune into a new reality, not a force that had to be resisted or medicated away.
But to survive this self-imposed internal friction and this high-tension regimen, the personality required a massive defense mechanism. This led to the internal civil war, a split into two distinct high-tension parts.
This internal split was absolutely essential to prevent total psychic disintegration. You couldn't live in that state without it.
So what are the two parts?
First, we have the shell. The sources call it the dark triad CEO.
The CEO, so calculating.
Calculating, detached, unemotional. This is the mask of absolute control, forged in response to the immense pressure of the stimulants and the constant need to succeed in the external, entirely as a system to be gamed.
And it uses some pretty intense psychological tools.
It weaponizes arrogance, or what the sources call false pride, as a narcissistic defense against a deep ingrained shame.
And that arrogance has to be constantly justified. It's fortified by receipts, tangible proofs of its competence.
Exactly. The shell can only maintain its control through success. A high SAT score, surviving a drug stack that would annihilate someone else, achieving some kind of external validation.
These are the receipts.
These are the receipts that maintain the shell's authority. And this shell, it's a mirror. It reflects the authoritarian demands of the system that first prescribed the drugs and instilled the shame in the first place. It is the system's own tool, turned inwards against the self.
And then trapped inside that calculating armor, you have the core. This is the shame child.
The authentic self, the vibrating, squirrely self.
The self that sees the wiggling world.
That's it. And the core is defined by a constant state of what the sources call immense shame. Its hyper-awareness, which is often mislabeled as just ADHD, is actually the hypervigilance of a child who learned very early on that one wrong move or one failure would bring the wrath of the authoritarian figures who define their life.
So the drug stack, paradoxically, became chemical armor.
It did. It allowed this internal civil war to exist in a high-tension peak state, rather than allowing the core to collapse into total paralyzing depression.
So the tension between the controlling shell and the vibrating core is the engine.
It is the engine of the entire personality. The whole thing is powered by that conflict.
Okay, so that internal tension, this constant psychic warfare between the rigid, arrogant shell and the vibrating, shame-driven core, is the engine that powers the next phase.
Yes, the transformation phase.
The individual actively engineered a catastrophic breakdown of their own ego. They chose the high-velocity left-hand path of transgression. What exactly did they gain from this self-imposed internal disruption?
Is the central question.
And how did this lead to the emergence of these archetypes, the Puritanus and the Jester King?
This is the phase of what the sources call engineered mortification. And we have to be clear, this isn't just a casual drug trip. It's a cold, calculated strategy of psychic assault.
A two-step process, it seems.
A two-step process. First, they hypertrophied the ego, the shell, using high-dose stimulants until it was pathologically brittle and just filled with that false pride.
They built it up to be as big and fragile as possible.
Exactly. Then, they used psychedelics, specifically DMT, to force a neurological collapse of that ego, which we now know corresponds to the disintegration of the brain's default mode network, the DMN.
The DMN being essentially the brain's internal manager, the seat of the ego, of self-reference. When it collapses, the sense of I vanishes. The sources refer to this forced collapse as narcissistic mortification.
It is the ultimate psychological gambit. I mean, you're betting everything. By surviving this self-induced psychological catastrophe, what the sources call the primitive terror of self-dissolution. They achieve the grail of transformation.
The ultimate validation.
The ultimate validation. Their anti-fragile nature could withstand the complete and total destruction of its own organizing principle, the ego. The arrogant shell was destroyed, but the underlying core, the true self, survived and integrated the experience.
And this leads to the ultimate victory in their internal war, the validation of the core.
Yes. The old system that ends from parents and society that required a neurotypical performance, that system is definitively beaten.
When?
It's beaten when the deep, vibrating, squirrely ADHD perception is validated and integrated by this profound psychedelic experience. They transform what everyone had labeled a disorder into a mastered integrated state.
The success of this insane regimen becomes the final receipt.
The ultimate receipt. It proves the underlying core's chaotic reality is not a defect, but a unique lens onto the world. The shame is just dissolved in the face of that survival.
Now we can place this transformation within these psychological archetypes, starting with the pure eternus potential. Now, pure eternus is often associated with the Peter Pan syndrome, right? The eternal child who can't grow up.
That's the common and usually negative interpretation. The shadow side.
But the sources point to a positive potential here.
The pure has two faces. The shadow side is that stagnation, the refusal to commit to reality, but the positive potential is the divine child.
The divine child, what does that represent?
The divine child is defined as a manifestation of the archetype of the self, which Carl Jung described as the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious. It represents the emergence of a new, enlivening idea or energy.
So a breakthrough.
An expansion in consciousness. It is the symbol of hope and renewal. This is the immense chaotic potential that was previously trapped inside that stagnant, shame-driven ego structure built by the stimulants. The chaotic path in this analysis unlocked this divine child potential.
So the individual successfully navigated the pure shadow. They turned the perpetual high energy of their ADHD mind from a developmental trap into a source of immense creative potential.
That's the argument, yes.
But the ultimate outcome is the volatile synthesis of the Jester King.
The Jester King is the resolution of that internal civil war. It's the pure who finally learns how to utilize that divine child potential for productive, if still very high-risk, ends.
And the archetype integrates two opposing forces.
Two necessary forces. The Jester Trickster, which is the transgressive, chaotic force you needed to dismantle the tyrannical, rigid ego with the king. The capacity for order, for rule, for governance.
And this synthesis, the sources say, resolves the Fisher King archetype. For those who don't know, that's the wounded king whose domain was a wasteland because of his own creative impotence.
Right. The Jester King takes the wound, the oscillopsia, the high-frequency chaos, and turns it into the very source of his unique rule. His power comes from his wound, not in spite of it.
And the key to maintaining this volatile mastery is what the sources call a continuous balance.
Yes. The Jester King can order his kingdom, his internal life, his external world, precisely because the integrated shadow, the Jester, remains present and active and disruptive.
And why is that Jester function so vital? Why can't the king just establish order and, move on?
Because the king, if left unchecked, inevitably develops what Alan Watts calls spiritual pride.
The ego wanting to congratulate itself for achieving transcendence.
Exactly. Look at me, I'm so enlightened. The Jester function is there specifically to reveal the truth and to laugh at the king's inevitable self-importance. It's the built-in counter-cybernetic loop for the personality itself.
So the Jester keeps the king honest.
It ensures the king never becomes static, rigid, or tyrannical, because the Jester is always threatening disruption from within.
This creates a high-tension, fragile, volatile structure. It is a form of mastery, yes, but it is not peace.
Not at all. The stability relies on the continuous, almost manic struggle between the ordering king and the chaotic, truth-telling Jester.
The individual has achieved a profound synthesis of opposites.
But the cost of maintaining that balance is immense. It constantly requires the same transgression and high energy that built it in the first place. It's the ultimate anti-fragile creation, a system that requires volatility to thrive, a kingdom that can only maintain its order by constantly, flirting with collapse.
Okay, this brings us to the ultimate critical question that the sources really force us to address.
The big one.
The big one. Given the 15 years of amphetamine exposure, the resulting physical trauma of the oscillopsia, and the intentional neurological shock via DMT, we have to ask, what if this complex mastery, the anti-fragility, the integration, the Jester King, what if it's actually just a highly sophisticated delusion? Where is the line between synchronicity, the meaningful alignment of your inner and outer reality, and outright psychosis, particularly for a mind that is operating so close to the edge?
This is the danger. This is the risk inherent in the left-hand path.
Yeah.
It explicitly accepts the risk of catastrophic failure.
And that includes...
That includes permanent psychosis. The path is not safe. However, the individual's perceived survival and their functional success in the world, we have to consider that through some more advanced theories of perception and reality construction.
Theories that might lend some credence to their highly subjective, wiggly internal reality.
Exactly. I think we need to look at this through the holographic reality model that the sources reference.
This is a complex idea, but the gist is that the world might not be as fixed and solid as Newtonian physics describes it.
Right. This model suggests a new way of looking at consciousness, where that sharp distinction we make between the subject me and the object the world begins to break down.
We know from quantum mechanics that the very act of observation changes particles.
The sources suggest that this principle might translate to our macroscopic level, that consciousness can affect physical systems, perhaps by influencing the vast information network that structures reality itself.
So if reality is less fixed and more responsive to our consciousness, what is the most exciting application of this idea?
The most profound implication is that we respond to the model of reality in our head. Our deep unconscious belief system hold astonishing power over our external physical reality, far beyond what conventional medicine currently accepts.
And the sources cite this shocking anecdote to prove the point. The story of the man with malignant tumors.
Yes. His tumors completely melted away when he believed he was receiving a potent new drug called creosote.
But it was a placebo.
A pure placebo. Yet the physical change in his body was real. His belief healed him.
And the power of that belief is just. It's almost unbelievable. When he read studies that debunked the drug, that said it was useless.
His tumors returned almost immediately.
But the story continues, and this is where it gets truly unsettling for our neat and tidy understanding of reality.
It really does. The doctor, realizing the power of his patient's belief, decided to lie. He injected him with nothing but salt water.
While claiming it was an even more potent, super refined version of the drug.
And the tumors vanished again. For months, his belief alone, even when he was just receiving salt water, accessed what the sources call some deep level of healing himself.
Until the end.
Until he read final conclusive studies confirming creosote was useless. His belief shattered, the tumors returned one last time, and he died. But his reality and his physical body was demonstrably shaped by his internal model.
Okay, let's apply this directly to the Jester King. The individual we examined, with their anti-fragile brain, the high-frequency internal chaos, and their physically induced wiggly world perception, they weren't trying to fight reality, they were building a new model of it.
They were uniquely situated to do so. They were able to construct a reality model, a kind of hyperstition at a personal level that was strong enough to validate their internal chaos.
So the internal triumph of the core, the validation of that squirrely reality as a source of power, creates a powerful feedback loop.
A feedback loop that the external world then appears to confirm through synchronicity and successful manipulation. What looks, from the outside, like amphetamine-fueled grandiosity or psychosis, may, from the inside, feel like the liberation that someone like Alan Watts describes.
So the distinction between mastering reality and being utterly delusional.
It may simply be a question of whether or not the external world aligns with your self-constructed narrative. If it works, you're a genius. If it doesn't, you're insane.
This brings us to the crucial philosophical check on all of this. The philosophical test of transcendence. The moral and ethical check on this new volatile mastery. Is it sustainable?
We can apply the test of Alan Watts, who focuses on the ego. Watts suggests that true liberation comes from realizing that the ego, the image you have of yourself, it doesn't exist.
It's just a concept, a word.
It's not a concrete reality.
Yeah.
He says you cannot transform your own nature into unattached selflessness because you have a selfish reason for wanting to do it. You want to be congratulated.
This is the case of spiritual pride.
Exactly. When you finally understand that you, as you conceive yourself to be, isn't really there, then you are liberated from the tyranny of that self-image. This directly parallels the ego dissolution via narcissistic mortification. The system was beaten by realizing the self-image it built, the rigid shell, was an illusion.
That sounds like a perfect justification for the Jester King, then. Using the annihilation of the ego to achieve freedom. But the sources provide a necessary counterweight, a different perspective, in Manly Hall's moral framework, which is far more stern about the laws of consequence.
Hall provides a framework based on universal law. It's much less forgiving. Corruption is subject to punishment. Good must prevail. It's a moral universe.
And he's very clear on how change happens.
He insists that reform cannot happen through prayer or just wishing it away. It can only happen through the intentional correction of your faults. He warns that everyone who abuses any fact of life will suffer from that abuse. The law of consequence is inevitable.
So if you choose to use the cocaine, or in this case, the high-dose amphetamines and the dark triad methods of the shell,
The punishment comes directly upon yourself, not from some punitive god, but from the immutable mechanics of the universal law.
this is the profound tension at the very heart of the Jester King. If its structure relies so heavily on dark triad arrogance, that false pride that was the shell's survival tactic, and on chemically fueled grandiosity, is it built on a foundation that must eventually suffer the inevitable punishment Hall describes?
Right. Can a system built on transgression truly achieve a lasting, sustainable order?
It's the central conflict.
The Jester King exists precisely in this precarious nexus. It's using selfish reason, the dark triad arrogance of the shell, the sheer will to survive and conquer, to force a psychological catastrophe. And in surviving that breakage, it achieves a result that structurally resembles unattached selflessness, which is Watts's liberation of the core.
It's a tightrope walk.
A tightrope walk between the moral demands of the universal law, which demands integrity and consequence, and the necessity of personal transgression required to escape an already suffocating, shame-inducing system.
So what's the final assessment?
The assessment is that it is a genuine achievement of integration, but it's one that is permanently high risk. And the constant threat of that underlying universal law is exactly what keeps the jester, the trickster element, active.
Preventing the king from succumbing to the spiritual pride that would lead to his eventual downfall.
The system is stable only because it is in continuous controlled chaos. The alternative for this individual was simply becoming the shadow pure, a chaotic man-child. The Jester King transcends that by accepting the volatility and weaponizing the very tools of transgression that Hall warns against.
But keeps them in check.
By keeping them in check with the constant awareness of the impending consequence. It's a system designed to delay the inevitable correction, hoping that the utility of the chaos outweighs the moral debt incurred. #outro. We have completed our deep dive into intentional friction. We've seen that purposeful disruption, whether it's aimed at political systems or at the psychological self, requires generating a tremendous amount of friction.
A huge amount.
The individual we examined achieved a complex mastery by turning his internal disorder, that high-frequency, wiggly reality forged by years of stimulants and the resulting focal dystonia, into a self-validated, anti-fragile reality.
The paradox here is profound, and I think it's applicable to any system you might want to change. To shatter the external or internal system that was trapping your authentic self, you must be willing to shatter the ego you built to protect yourself.
You have to be willing to break.
And in surviving that breakage, the individual emerges as the Jester King, the only one who is allowed to laugh at the rigid structure because he understands the price of order. He paid the price of psychological catastrophe and lived to tell the tale.
So the final provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. In a world of increasing entropy, where systems naturally run down and predictability is prized above all else, is the Jester King's chaotic, high-tension existence. This constant balance between the trickster and the ruler, between delusion and mastery, between universal law and personal transgression, is that a necessary model for true anti-fragility?
Or is it simply the most glorious, spectacularly complex way to hasten your own burnout?
That's the question.
Keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep taking that deep dive into your own source material.